I obediently sat next to my boyfriend, Alfred Posey. Meeting Alfred's parents for the first time, I wore a light pink dress with shoulder-length hair, smiling sweetly. I looked like I was trying to please the elders. Sure enough, Alfred's parents liked me immediately, praising me endlessly. But no one knew that my hand hidden under the tablecloth was cold and sweaty. Ding! Wisnovel reminds you to click the subscribe button in the bottom right corner to read the complete novel. Alfred's uncle, Colton Amell, sat across from me. Ever since he sat down, his eyes were distant and indifferent. Willa looks like such a good girl. Yes, she looks so elegant and gentle, really likable. Alfred has a good eye this time. I dislike those girls who dress up and attract attention, trying to impress others. Colton, look, isn't Alfred's girlfriend nice? Colton Amell finally looked at me for the first time, his thin lips curling slightly. Your name is Willa, right? It's a nice name. My entire back was almost soaked. I quickly looked up at him, then nervously lowered my head. Right, uncle, our Willa has a nice name, but she's even more obedient and lovely. Obedient? Colton raised an eyebrow with a smirk, asking back. Yes, uncle, Willa is very obedient. This is her first relationship. Her parents have strict upbringing. Alfred put his arm around my shoulder, looking quite proud. Colton's smile deepened, but his eyes turned cold. He glanced at the steel watch on his wrist, his voice heavy. Her first relationship? Strict upbringing? I was so anxious, I didn't have time to think too much. Under the tablecloth, I kicked off my shoes, lightly brushing my toes against Colton's pants. I summoned all my courage to look directly at him, with a pleading look in my eyes. The last hint of a smile on Colton's face disappeared. His eyes were distant and stern, lips pressed into a thin line. My heart was beating so fast, almost bursting out of my chest. Looking into his eyes, tears almost welled up. He finally nodded slightly and said, "She seems fine, you two get along well." Alfred smiled. Uncle, rest assured, I will treat Willa well. Midway through the banquet, Colton got up and went to the restroom. Shortly after, I received a text message on my phone. Come out. I hurriedly turned off my phone. Alfred and his cousins were drinking. His parents were chatting with some relatives. I stood up, excused myself to the restroom, and left the private room. Just as I passed by, Colton Amell grabbed my wrist with a serious face, directly pinning me against the wall. Is this how you pretend to be obedient and deceive Alfred? I didn't. Willa, you weren't this obedient in front of me before. His voice was too cold, and his presence was too intimidating. I didn't dare to look at him at all, but I couldn't help feeling a bit wronged. With a slight stinging in my eyes, I glanced at him, then lowered my head, murmuring softly, "You weren't this cold when you called me baby before." It's been almost 2 years since I broke up with Colton Amell. I had almost forgotten how he held me, kissed me, and tenderly comforted me in bed. When I got together with him, I had just started my second year of college at the age of 20, innocent and passionate. The first time we were intimate, he held me and gently called me baby in my ear. "Baby, don't be afraid, it won't hurt." When I cried uncontrollably, he could stop and apologize, holding me tightly. A man who was ruthless and decisive in the daytime, showing no mercy. To show such tenderness and indulgence to a young girl in her 20s undoubtedly had a tremendous impact. At that time, I loved him almost uncontrollably, until finally, I overheard him casually telling his friends, "I would never marry Willa, we are not suitable for marriage." That night, I packed my bags and left in a sorry state. Later, he called me 3 times, but I didn't answer, and he never tried to contact me again. Perhaps at that moment, I understood that Colton's feelings for me were superficial and shallow. Baby, I didn't know when I started crying, tears staining my face. Colton loosened his grip on my chin slightly. He let out a sigh and gently kissed my wet eyelashes as I cried, "Baby, you should broke up with Alfred." Upon hearing this, I finally came to my senses. I pushed his hand away. "Sorry, Mr. Amell, I will not break up." "Why?" I avoided his gaze, tidying up my slightly messy hair in front of the mirror. "Because Alfred Posey said he would marry me. We are already discussing marriage." In the mirror, Colton's brows furrowed slightly, but he didn't say anything. I washed my hands with my head down, and even after I finished, he remained silent. I didn't linger. I turned and walked away. "Willa, you know I never give anyone a second chance." My steps faltered. I knew very well how cold Colton Amell could be. After sharing a bed for so long, he could easily talk about giving up. Today, when he mentioned breaking up with Alfred Posey, I could sense it was a disguised way of seeking reconciliation. It's just a pity. I am no longer the same Willa Leatham. Without looking back, I continued to move forward. Colton did not call out to me either. Alfred Posey's parents were quite pleased with me, so our engagement was put on the agenda. On a weekend before the engagement, Alfred took me to a resort for a getaway. He booked 2 rooms, sent me back to my room, and hurriedly left. In the evening, I received a call from a stranger. "Miss Willa, I am Mr. Amell's assistant, waiting for you downstairs." I didn't respond, preparing to hang up the phone. "Miss Willa, Mr. Amell said you are a smart girl, you know how to choose." I hung up the phone in a daze. It was raining silently outside. I went downstairs and got into the discreet black car. I pressed myself against the car door, wanting to be further away from Colton Amell. "Your hair is wet." After some time, Colton suddenly raised his hand and lightly touched my forehead. head. I trembled and instinctively tried to move away. But then I didn't move. I looked at him, my voice soft. Mr. Amel, Alfred and I are getting married. We already had sex. Upon hearing my words, Colton didn't even furrow his brows. He brushed aside my wet hair, pinched my earlobe, and gave a faint smile. Colton instructed the driver to change direction, held my wrist, and brought me into his arms. He lowered his head, whispered in my ear, "Baby, let me take you to see a good show." His breath lingered by my ear. In the enclosed car, I could smell the faint scent of cigarettes on him, and the icy fragrance of his familiar cologne. All this familiarity felt like a cruel torture. I lowered my eyes. "Mr. Amel, please let go of me first, okay?" This posture was too ambiguous, not suitable for our current status. Colton remained silent, his slender fingers landing on the side of my ear. He brushed aside a strand of hair that was hanging down, tucking it behind my ear. Just a light, unintentional touch of his fingertips, and a layer of tiny goosebumps rose on my nape uncontrollably. I turned my face, trying to avoid the contact. Colton gently kissed me on the cheek. "Willa, be a good girl." He didn't release me, but instead wrapped his arms around me. His chin rested on the side of my neck, lightly rubbing against it. He kissed me again, his voice deep. "Are you really going to part ways with me?" The car raced through the dark rainy night, like a sword piercing through the rain curtain. In his embrace at that moment, I didn't know whether to cry or to laugh. If talking about parting ways, we had already broken up and become strangers, so naturally, we had parted ways. But if speaking of a real parting, he was the man who had been closest to me in this world. Even every inch of my body remembered him firmly. Despite the long breakup, he still easily awakened every nerve in me. Suddenly, the car stopped, and the windshield wipers rhythmically swayed on the glass. The driver tactfully got out of the car. Colton held my hand and asked me to look outside. Through the car window and the rain curtain, I still recognized the man as Alfred Posey. Ignoring the heavy rain, he briskly walked down the steps. Not far away, there was another slender, but tall figure. I recognized him as Alfred's trusted assistant and his closest friend, Jeff Bowen. After a few seconds, Jeff Bowen dropped his umbrella and ran towards Alfred. They embraced each other recklessly, engaging in a passionate kiss. "Are you sure you had sex with Alfred Posey?" Colton chuckled lightly, pinching my earlobe. "You little trickster." I suddenly lowered my eyes and laughed. I knew Alfred Posey had someone he liked, but I never thought it would be a man. But that was okay, I didn't like him either. Even if it's not Alfred Posey, don't I have other options? I pushed Colton away, in the dimly lit car. I was surprisingly calm to the extreme. If I remember correctly, we broke up 2 years ago. In these 2 years, I didn't have only Alfred Posey as a boyfriend. Of course, when it comes to marriage, indeed he is the only one. I am an adult, it's normal to be intimate after falling in love. Before I could finish speaking, Colton suddenly grabbed my chin. "Willa." The last hint of a smile on his face had vanished. I knew the consequences of his anger were terrifying, and I reflexively felt a bit scared. But he released my chin, his slender fingers landing on the hem of my skirt. "If I find out that another man has touched you." Colton lifted the wrinkled hem of my skirt on my knee. "Willa Leatham, I will kill that man first, then come back to slowly torture you." The night was dark, but his eyes were even darker than the night itself. When our skins touched, I was so scared that I almost cried. All the old memories that had been buried came rushing back in an instant, making my spine cold and covered in cold sweat. I was young and carefree back then. I had good relationships with my senior and junior schoolmates. Occasionally, after class, we would have a meal together at a small restaurant outside the school. To me, these were just normal interactions among college students. But when Colton saw us together by chance, he flew into a rage. He was paranoid, possessive, and frighteningly extreme. No matter how much I apologized and begged for mercy, it was useless. He bound my wrists to the bedpost and said to me word by word, "Willa Leatham, I only believe in one thing when it comes to handling mistakes. Unless a person tastes the bitterness to the bone after making a mistake, she will never truly fear and repent." Those 3 days were something I dared not look back on. I cried until my tears ran dry, and my throat became completely hoarse. Finally, he softened and let me go. He then humbled himself and gently comforted me. When I was young, although I was afraid, there was a secret joy in my heart. I thought that such overwhelming dominance showed how much he cared about me. But later, I understood. It wasn't because he cared or liked me so much. It was just that men like Colton Amel, when it comes to things or people they possess, even if they don't care much, they would never allow others to covet them. But now, there was no time to think about all this. I just wanted to escape from him quickly. "Colton Amel, I'm sorry, I lied. There is no other man. No other man. You have no other man, do you?" Colton chuckled softly, but his hands did not stop moving. "No, really, there is no one else. If you don't believe me, you can have your people investigate me. After we broke up, I never dated anyone else. Alfred Posey is the first." I knew his temperament, so I gathered my courage to look him in the eye without blinking. This kind of frankness and sincerity sincerity seemed to deepen the smile at the corner of his lips. Willa, I don't believe what you say. I only believe in my own feelings. After he finished speaking, he grabbed my shoulders and pushed me down onto the seat. The hem of my skirt flipped up, partially covering my face. Baby, I will personally check to verify if you are lying. His voice was so cold, like a freezing knife cutting into people's flesh. I lay there, tears of humiliation kept pouring out. The process was actually very brief, but I was in unbearable pain, both physically and spiritually, as if someone had thrown me on the ground and trampled on me fiercely. Why did he have the right to treat me like this, to humiliate me? Colton calmly took out a wet tissue to wipe his fingers. Then he neatly adjusted my clothes and sat me on his lap. My whole body was ice-cold, trembling, and my face was pale, without a trace of color. His tone softened a bit, and the strength of his kisses was gentle, as if he was afraid of scaring me again. Baby, you are indeed very obedient. Perhaps he was in a good mood. He lowered his head and pressed his face against mine. What do you want? I will give it to you, okay? I want to go back first. There was still a trembling tone in my voice. He wasn't angry, kissed me again. Tonight, let's go to my place first. I shook my head numbly. I will handle Alfred Posey, don't worry. I kept shaking my head. I'm sorry, I don't want to break up with Alfred Posey. Willa. He loosened his grip slightly, his voice turning cold. Our wedding date is set. I'm about to get married. Colton Amel, please don't make it difficult for me. Are you sure you want to marry someone like Alfred Posey? I just need to be sure that he will marry me openly and honestly. That's enough for me. Marriage may not be that important, but it's not a child's play. I know. I'm clear about it. I just want to get married. As for who I marry, how he is, whether he loves me or not, I don't care. Do you understand? I looked at Colton like that, without a trace of emotion in my eyes. Perhaps my words annoyed him, as he chuckled lightly. Naive, foolish. Does it concern you? Willa, you know my personality. I won't make an exception again. So, can I go back now? His eyes darkened, lips pressed tight, and he remained silent. I adjusted my messy hair, opened the car door, and got out. He still didn't say a word. I bent down, closed the car door, without looking back. Without hesitation, and seemingly without much reluctance, I walked into the rain with big strides. Colton Amel, a proud son of heaven like him, will never understand the suffering of the world, and I didn't want to explain anything to him either. He won't marry me. I remember it clearly. The heavy rain poured on my face, making me unable to tell if I was crying. My biological mother was deceived for a whole decade when she was young. She inexplicably became the mistress of a married man. It wasn't until I was 8 years old that the man's wife suddenly brought many people to our door. Our house was smashed. Words like mistress were painted on the door, in the hallway, everywhere. My loving and kind father disappeared without a trace, behaving like a coward when the scandal was exposed. Since then, he never appeared in front of me and my mother again. And my mother, after experiencing such a disaster, completely collapsed. Sometimes she would suddenly cry and make a scene at home. She would hit herself wildly, and she would hit me too. After hitting, she would hold me and cry uncontrollably. The most frequent thing she said to me was, Willa, you must marry someone honestly in your life. You must marry with dignity. When I grew up a bit, I cried and said to her, can I not get married? Women don't only have marriage as an option in this world. I'll stay with you, accompany you for a lifetime. How about that? But she didn't allow it. She went crazy, hitting me, cursing me, pulling my hair, forcing me to kneel on the ground and swear. Perhaps because she was deceived so miserably by my biological father, getting married openly had become her obsession and had also become a kind of curse. She wouldn't forgive herself, nor would she forgive me. She was a pitiful woman, also my only relative. I couldn't just stand by and do nothing. After my biological father disappeared, my family was ruined. It was her who worked day and night to support me, to put me through school. She endured hardships, suffered grievances, but never once did she skimp on my living expenses. That was her only request to me, and I could only nod and accept. So, I don't love Alfred Posey, and Alfred Posey loves someone else. For me, none of that matters. As long as I can make her happy, content, and help her let go of the burden in her heart. As a daughter, I have fulfilled my filial duty. After that night, I never saw Colton Amel again.